Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Virtual Expo EM Spring 2021 Lecture Theatre. My name is Tim Easter, and I am your host for today. During these lectures, all attendees, other than the host, myself, and the speaker, will be automatically muted. Afterwards, there will be an opportunity to ask questions during the Q&A. For our first lecture, it is my pleasure to welcome Martin Neild, who will now give a presentation on authentic model railway operation. Over to you, Martin.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
That's great. Well, good morning, everybody. Nice to see so many of you on a Saturday morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Pete Rigby for inviting me to do this, and secondly, thanks to Tim for hosting it. And we had a practice yesterday which went pretty well, so fingers crossed. I'm going to talk to you today about authentic model railway operation. As we all know, making models to fine scale standards is very satisfying, but operating a layout in a prototype fashion creates an extra dimension to the hobby. In this talk, I'm going to explain the steps I suggest modelers should take if they want to operate their layouts authentically. These are my suggestions for a very enjoyable way to get more out of your hobby. I've been fascinated by railway operation ever since my train spotting days in and around Preston in the 1960s. I quickly got tired of writing down numbers and started to wonder where all these trains were coming from, where they were going to, why certain engines pulled certain trains, and what all the signals meant. Since then, it's become my main interest in the hobby. I enjoy making models, but I see it as a means to an end. I'm more interested in complete layouts and their operation than individual models, and I've tried to create layouts which operate like the real thing. My main interest is in the traditional steam railway from the 1880s to 1968. I'm not really interested in modeling the modern scene, but many of the things I have to say today are equally applicable to modern layouts. And this photograph, by the way, is of my good friend John Thompson's excellent northeastern layout, Lowburn Park. My main message today is that authentic operation is fun. Railway modelling is a hobby, not a job. It should be enjoyable, and operating a layout to a timetable with fully working signals is a lot more fun than just playing trains. I've lost count of the number of people who've operated my layout for the first time and been delighted with the experience of doing things in a railway-like manner. Over recent years, I think there's been too much emphasis on making really superb models and not enough on how they actually worked. After all, the railways existed to shift goods and people from A to B, and we need to try and capture some of that spirit in our models. Knowledge of the steam era is unfortunately fading fast, and it's important that we try to record it. The best way of recreating the steam railway, as Bob Essery said, is through modelling. In normal times, I go to lots of model railway exhibitions, and all too often I see layouts which are badly designed and operated. There are sidings in daft places, and operation is apparently random. There are automatic couplings that don't work, carriages get propelled without being coupled to a locomotive, and above all, a lack of working signals, or signals that do work but then get ignored. If you're interested in operating your layout more authentically, then there are several publications available to help. Bob Essery has written a series of 5 excellent books. There are now numerous books about signalling, and information can be obtained from line societies, whatever era that you model, the HMRS, the National Railway Museum, the National Archives, etc. So what are the essential things you need to do if you want to operate your layout authentically? Well, I think they are as follows. You need to have a convincing story, a realistic track plan, working signals, a timetable or sequence, authentic train formations, and you need to replicate real railway operations. Also, if you're going to build an exhibition layout, you need to think about how to entertain and perhaps educate the public. I'm going to go into more detail about each of these elements in the following slides. And this photograph, by the way, is of a Lowcombe brake van arriving at Eccleston, which is my Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway layout. So let's start with a convincing story. That's easy if you're modelling a real location, of course, but if you're modelling an imaginary location, then you need to do some creative thinking, and either way involves research. You need to develop a history of your railway line and to understand the geography of the area. And you also need to understand the economy of the area, and all this information will help you design a realistic track plan and to plan the signalling and train services. Here is the supposed location of my Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway branch terminus, Eccleston, which I hope you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of that map. All the lines on this map really did exist apart from that branch, and Croston sidings, which I've imagined at the junction of the branch with the main line from Preston to Liverpool. When I was planning my layout, I researched the railway history of the area. I read about the history of Eccleston and the industries it had, and I got hold of some working timetables of other branch lines, which gave me an idea of the sort of services which the branch might have seen. All this contributed to the story behind the line, which helped me work out how to operate it authentically. Now we need to look at realistic track plans. Again, if you're modelling a real location, this is obviously easy, although you may need some compression. But if you're modelling a fictitious line, again, you'll need to do some research. Real railway companies didn't design track plans on the back of an envelope in the pub, like lots of modellers do. They designed them to meet the anticipated traffic requirements of the location, and they changed them from time to time. Some stations were too small and had to be expanded to cope with the traffic. Others were too ambitious and never had the traffic to justify the investment. The designers of track plans also took into account the topography of the chosen site. You need to study your chosen railway company, as many had characteristic track plans. Perhaps the most famous example is the Midland Railway's Settle to Carlisle line, which only had one facing point in its whole 72-mile route. Or another example would be the North Eastern Railway, which had some extremely complex track formations and used raised coal drops, as it didn't use private owner wagons, but used its own hopper wagons to carry coal. If you can identify these characteristics, it will help you create a convincing track plan. And you can use key elements from similar locations to help in the process. This is a photograph of the approaches to Liverpool Exchange in the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway days. Some lovely flowing track work there, and third rail. To illustrate what I mean, I'm going to show you 3 examples of typical Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway branch terminus layouts, and then show you how I used elements from them to create a track plan of my layout, Eccleston. This is Rishworth, and as you can see, it was double track, as most of the LNY branch lines were, as they had to cope with significant amounts of goods traffic. Despite this, it only had one platform face and had 2 separate types of goods facilities. Above the platform, so to speak, on the drawing, were 2 coal sidings, while the general goods yard was below. And incidentally, there was no head shunt, which is why there are so many track points in the goods yard. Next is Home Firth, which is similar but different. This time there was a piece shed, as in pieces of cloth, not piece in the world, above the platform, while below there were coal and goods facilities. It also had a turntable at the end of the platform and a head shunt. And then finally, here's Horwich, which served the town where the famous Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway locomotive works were located. This had all the key elements: double track, but with a single platform face, separate goods and coal yards, but with the addition of private sidings facing in the opposite direction to all the others off the head shunt, which makes for interesting operation. Incidentally, you may note that in all three of these cases, unlike your typical Great Western or Southern Branch terminus, there's no engine shed and there are no carriage sidings, as the L&Y preferred to concentrate these at major traffic centres. I wanted to design a typical L&Y branch terminus track plan, so I came up with something which combined the typical elements of all three of the above, and here it is. As you can see, it's got double track, a single platform face, separate goods and coal yards, a head shunt, and the idea pinch from Horwich, two private sidings facing in the opposite direction. So that's an example of how to create what I think is a fairly typical L&Y branch terminus layout. Perhaps in designing your next layout, you could do something similar and identify the typical characteristics of your favourite railway and its company's track plans, many of which, of course, survived throughout the LMS and into the BR period. The next thing I'd like to consider is working signals. This fascinating photograph shows the excursion platforms at Blackpool Talbot Road, or North Station as it's now called, in L&Y days, and it features lots of wonderful signals, several locomotives and steam everywhere. Glorious picture. Virtually all railway lines were signalled for safety reasons. There were exceptions, but generally speaking, they were goods-only minor lines. It was a legal requirement that any lines that carried passenger traffic had to be properly signalled. And so I believe that virtually all model railways, unless they're models of goods-only lines, should have working signals. They should not be considered as an afterthought like telegraph poles, but designed and built in from the start. They're not difficult to make and to make work. Several kits are available from well-known companies, and parts are available from Model Signal Engineering. They also help with company identification for a layout. Great Western signals were different to Caledonian signals, for example, and adding them to your layout helps to give identity. And they also add to the pleasure of operating the layout authentically. And if you exhibit your layout, they help the audience to anticipate what's going to happen next. You can add levels of complexity, such as interlocking, bells and block instruments if you wish, but it's not essential. Although having said that, I've found that interlocking reduces operator error considerably, and using bells and block instruments reduces the need for operators to shout at each other behind the layout. As I said in the introduction, there are now numerous books available on signalling, and another good source of information is the Signalling Record Society. So this is the signalling diagram for my layout, which shows the points and signals operated by the lever frame, and those points which would have been hand operated. For those people who know my layout, the gasworks beyond the bridge exists only in my imagination. So it's worth getting to understand the principles of block signalling and using working signals on your layout. It's also a good plan to have a timetable or a sequence, and this is the working timetable for the Horwich branch, the track plan of which I showed you earlier. So this is a simple example of a real working timetable. You can see the range of traffic, mostly passenger trains, but one or two interspersed with some goods traffic. Real railways didn't run services at random, they were planned. Passenger services obviously ran to the public timetable, but goods services also ran at times determined in the working timetable. And all operating staff, such as signalmen, had copies of the working timetable, the appendix to the working timetable, and special traffic notices, etc. Operating a layout to a timetable reduces the random element. I've often stood in front of a layout at an exhibition and heard one operator say to another, "Let's have a goods train, we haven't had one of those for a while." But that's not how the real railway worked. There's also another factor, along with bells and block instruments, which reduces the need for operators to shout to each other. It gives operation a purpose. When a passenger train departs from your station, you can think of it as the 12:17 to Manchester or wherever your chosen destination might be. And it also creates teamwork between operators. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing, or at least they should do. Timetables are both interesting and challenging to compile. I use bits of paper to represent locomotives, sets of carriages, goods brake bands, etc., and I move them around on a table to represent each move and get things back to where they started at the end of a sequence. However, I'm sure there are clever computer programs out there which would do the same thing. And information about prototype timetables is increasingly available from line societies, the National Railway Museum, the National Archives, etc. So this slide shows the first page of the sequence I use, and as you can see, it's divided into 3 columns. The first describes the train in prototype terms. The second explains what the fiddle yard operator should be doing, and the third, what the station operator should be doing. So just to talk you through the first move is a through goods from Lostock Hall to Eccleston, conveying empty Lancashire and Yorkshire merchandise wagons and loaded minerals. The fiddle yard operator offers the goods train to Eccleston. Eccleston accepts it and drives the goods to the home signal, and then it drives it to the platform, runs round, shunts the brake van to the end of number 1 siding, shunts the loaded mineral wagons to the coal yard, runs around the merchandise wagons and propels them to the warehouse, and then it couples to the loco couples to the brake van in number 1 siding. The operator should isolate the loco. Meanwhile, the fiddle yard operator is preparing the passenger train, which is the next move. I won't go through it all in detail, but that's how I do my timetable. Obviously, different approaches would be needed for a much more complex layout. Next, I want to talk about authentic train formations. And this is a LMS Baltic tank designed by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, but built by the LMS, leaving Blackpool Central with an express passenger train in early LMS days. Trains were not random collections of vehicles, they were planned. Passenger trains were assembled according to a carriage marshalling book to ensure sufficient accommodation for each class was provided. Through carriages were frequently run between different locations, and indeed between different railway companies. And specialised vehicles such as restaurant cars, sleeping cars, and parcels vans were needed to be catered for. Even the simplest 1-carriage branch train needed a brake vehicle and to provide accommodation for the guard. Goods trains were divided into different classes: fully fitted, partially fitted, unfitted, etc. And different types of trains required different locomotives, had restrictions on speed, and the numbers of wagons which were set out in the appendix to the working timetable. Goods trains were also assembled in sections, defined in the classification of a goods trains booklet, so that at each station a section could be detached as appropriate. Fitted and unfitted wagons for the same location were often marshalled in different sections of the train. If you take some time to research and understand all this, and in particular the rules and regulations which apply to traffic on your layout, then it can help you to get things right and also add to the pleasure of operating your layout. This photograph, by the way, is on a right-of-way goods, which is a classification that the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway had for very important goods traffic. You see the 2 lamps above the next to the chimney, and a right-of-way goods took precedence over ordinary passenger trains. I don't know what the special goods were in those 3 wagons, but it was obviously very important. We also need to replicate real railway operations, and here is a photograph of the preserved Barton Wright Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway 060 running around his train at Oxenhope on the Keighley-Anworth Valley Railway. If we are to operate our layouts in a railway-like manner, we need to replicate wheel operations. And so let's take running round as an example. If you go to a preserved steam railway and watch a loco run round its train, then you will see that it all takes longer than you think. First of all, the fireman has to get between the loco and the first carriage, disconnect the vacuum brake hose, and unscrew the screw coupling before lifting it onto its hook. Then the loco can move forward, and the fireman or signalman can change the points. The loco can then run round its train, although it may pause to take water. At the other end of the loop, the reverse has to happen. The fireman or the signalman has to change the points. The loco has to buffer up to the stock. The fireman has to get between the loco and the first carriage and couple them together, tighten up the screw coupling, and connect the vacuum pipe. And then before the train can move, the driver and the guard have to perform a vacuum brake test. We can't replicate some of these things on a model railway, but we can indicate what is happening by operating our trains at scale speeds and including pauses to replicate actions. Now to the controversial bit. I suggest using 3-link couplings or screw couplings rather than automatic ones. Using such couplings forces operators to replicate wheel operations to some extent, but also to introduce those pauses I was talking about. I know some modelers like to use automatic couplings for various reasons, but if you do, try and pause between moves. A running round move at a branch terminus like the one I have described might be authorized by hand signals, but at more complex locations, fixed signals would have been used. And if you have them on your layout, it greatly enhances operation if you use them to authorize moves. And please remember that steam engines needed water at regular intervals and coaling from time to time. So if you build in such moves into your sequence, it can enhance authenticity. Also in steam days, there were lots of light engine and brake van, and empty stop movements. Introducing these into your sequence can give it a more authentic feel. And another thing which is worth considering is to use a wagon movement system to give shunting a purpose. Peter Denny used a color-coded system for his wagon movements, or alternatively, you could perhaps adapt the American waybill system to give each wagon an imagined load and destination. This photo, by the way, shows the end of the bay platforms at Rochdale Station in the 1960s with a tank locomotive which has just taken water. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all go to a model railway exhibition? And I hope we can all do that again soon. But at the moment, it's impossible. If you take your layout, it could be to an exhibition, it could be argued that even more important to operate your layout in a railway-like manner, to demonstrate to the public how the traditional steam railway worked. I'm sorry about the poor quality of this picture, by the way, but it was taken in a hurry at the Nottingham show several years ago and shows Ian Futers operating his short-lived model of the old Fort William station. At exhibitions, it's important to keep things running, because if you don't, the public will walk away. But you can still operate in an authentic manner. Exhibition layout should be entertaining, but also informative. It helps if you use a timetable or sequence and display that to the public in some way. But this is something I've yet to find a way to do with my layout, I confess. And this shows my layout at Newcastle, the Newcastle show 7 years ago, with all mock-up buildings. Now I think we have some videos of my layout to show you. This first one was taken at Alexandra Palace in March 2019, just two years ago, before we couldn't go to shows anymore. So just enjoy this for a bit. I think that's the end of that one, Tim. It's working. So this is the second video. This was taken at the Leamington and Warwick exhibition in 2017, and this still has a mock-up chimney there, as you can see. So it's a bit earlier, but interestingly, it features the same logo, I think. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed those videos. So just to conclude, to summarize what I've been saying, really, authentic operation is fun. It adds an extra dimension to the hobby. Information is available. Why not give it a try? And just to conclude with a shameless plug, if you've enjoyed what I've been talking about, I have written a book about it, which is available from the usual suppliers. So thank you very much, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions. Hello.
So, any questions, anybody? I haven't seen anybody commenting on the page. So, if you can please raise your hand, I think is the easiest thing to do. There's a thing for reactions at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to raise your hand and ask any questions you wish to do so. Okay, Parrot Tom, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
When you talk about operating to a realistic timetable, I mean, when I go to layouts, when I go to exhibitions, sometimes I see incredibly sort of small sort of branch lines, and where maybe there would have been maybe 2 or 3 trains a day, possibly. So sorry, sometimes you have to sort of operate more trains than they realistically would have run on a particular branch line, for example, to make it interesting for the public to view.
That's right. That's correct. Yes. As I said, you have to entertain the public. So yes, even on my layout, I've invented 6 different sorts of trains which would have run on the layout. There's 2 different sorts of passenger trains, 2 or 3 different goods trains, and a gasworks trip. So you have to use your imagination to imagine what sort of traffic might have been found on that particular branch. But you are correct. If you want to operate it exactly as a prototype would have done, there would have been, on a Great Western branch line, you might have had an auto train and a daily pick up goods, and that's it, really. Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Any other hands to raise? Anybody?
Alan actually put his hand up, Tim. I don't know whether he's possible.
Alan Rhodes. Right. Have you unmuted you, Alan?
Got to unmute. No, I didn't put my hand up. I put the light on.
Oh, right. That's fair enough.
So you can see me. I mean, that's the difference, you see.
Good job this isn't an auction. Otherwise, you'd have...
Indeed.
Oh, yes, very true. Well, if I was bidding online, that wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when Martin's book first came out, I reviewed it for the Historical Model Railway Society.
Oh, right.
And Martin will know of that review.
Yes, I remember it.
But I mean, I endorse all that he says. I mean, I've got a small branch line. I don't take it out any longer. But when I did exactly as Martin's done, as it's a branch line terminus, single track. I had a sequence which cycled through Monday to Saturday. And you might think, well, that's odd. But basically, the branch line had different trains on different days of the week.
Very true, yeah.
And I'm just endorsing what Martin said. I thoroughly enjoy operating accurately. Trouble is, one of the big mysteries that I've never solved, and I don't think Martin mentioned it, we know so little about locomotive links for what that worked. So what trains went through station on a day, and how many locos worked it is very, very difficult to find out.
Mm. Yes, well, in the Alan Wise Society, we have got a very, very good book on passenger workings, which does give the locomotive working for that day, if you like, so that which trips it ran. But I do agree with you; it's difficult to find that information for lots of different other locations.
Thank you, Martin.
It's a pleasure.
Right. Well, is that everybody? Anybody else?
Well, thank you very much, everybody.
No problem. Well, thank you very much, Martin, for your lovely lecture. Really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And we'll be ready for the next one. Oh, hang on, another one from Para Tom. Hang on. Tom, if you want to unmute yourself, please.
One last question, Martin. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Are you ever tempted to run locos in your layout that might not necessarily have run on that particular area because you like the look of them, or?
I try to resist such temptation, but on that last video, the 440 came in. There probably wouldn't have been a 440 on that branch line, but my excuse is that it was a running in turn from a shed or something. It's just that I happened to acquire that locomotive. Somebody was selling it, and I thought I couldn't resist buying it.
Oh, well, fair enough. I mean, it's your layout.
Yeah.
License. Okay, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Oh, another one from Michael de Jong.
Hang on. You are unmuted, Michael. Hang on.
No, can't hear you.
Can you unmute yourself, please?
That's it.
Yeah.
Hello.
Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Right. I've gone back in time with, as you know, with my layout, which is Midhurst 1886.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, 1866.
66.
And I have the excitement of running a branch line terminus on a one engine in steam basis.
Right.
So you can imagine that things take a long time to do very little.
I can imagine it does. Yes.
Yeah.
And do you have fixed signals?
No, point indicators
Oh, right.
and one single semaphore.
Right. Right. Very early days.
Very early.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's everything on this one. So thank you
Thank
very
you very
much,
much.
Martin.
Pleasure. Cheerio, everybody. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Yeah, thanks, Martin.